Greetings. My name is Troy, and I would like to demonstrate a simple continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, a project that is part of the Azure Engineer Nanodegree program at Udacity. So let's dive right in. The first thing we need is a repository, and we have that here hosted at github.com. This repository hosts a Flask machine learning application that we will deploy as a web app via Azure App Services. Now, it's important to note that all the steps required to create the CI/CD pipeline have already been completed. So this repository, which is public, has a very detailed README file with step-by-step instructions with numerous screenshots on how you can create your own CI/CD pipeline. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we will just touch very high level the important components required. The first of which is our build server, which will be executed or which will run each time a change is made to our repository. The build server we're using is GitHub Actions integrated with GitHub that we access by clicking the Actions button toward the top of the screen. We can see that GitHub Actions is already configured and a number of workflows have been completed. If we drill down into those workflows and the build, we can look at the individual steps like the installation of dependencies, the linting of the code, and any tests that may have been configured. Now, before we leave GitHub, another thing to check is the installation of the application Azure Pipelines. This application installed through the GitHub Marketplace provides the integration between GitHub and Azure itself, and it will do the deployment of our web app. So we can check that by clicking on Settings within the repository, clicking on Integrations, and we see that Azure Pipelines is installed and that it is configured for all repositories. Now let's pivot over to the Azure portal and start an Azure Cloud Shell, which I've already done by clicking this icon toward the top of the screen. Here is the Azure Cloud Shell. Now we're inside the repository that's already been cloned from GitHub, the one we were just looking at. We've also created and sourced in a virtual environment. The next step after ensuring that we've installed all the dependencies is to spin up the web app itself. We'll use the Azure CLI and the command AZ web app up, defining the SKU as F1 for the free tier and giving it a name, in this case, Flask ML Azure Troy. Now, since we've already run this command, let's do a list, AZ web app list, and this should return the running web app. In this case, here's the name, Flask ML Service Troy, and here's the resource group that contains the web app. Now, if we look at the Azure portal and drill down into app services graphically and into our web app, an important bit of information is this URL here. This is the publicly available URL for our web app. So we should be able to right click on it, open up a new tab and hit the home page of the web app if everything's working. And it looks like it is as we've hit Scikit Prediction Home Continuous Delivery. Now back to the Azure Cloud Shell, we have a script in the repository called make predict azure app.sh. If we cat this file out, at the very bottom of the screen, we see there's a post command where we can enter the public URL of our web app, which I've already done in this case. So let's run this prediction and see if the web app will respond. And it does. We have a successful prediction. Now the next thing to do is to test this from end to end to see if everything is operating as we expect. Now, when we installed Azure Pipelines in GitHub, that made an integration between your account and the website Azure DevOps or dev.azure.com. This is where you would come and create a project and actually set up the pipeline that is going to be the conduit between GitHub and Azure. I've already done that by creating an application and creating the pipeline that we see here and that we'll watch in a few minutes once we kick everything into action. So the way that we test this from end to end is to simply make a change at GitHub. But first, let's go back to the Azure portal And let's take a look at the streaming logs so that we can see what's happening as we make these changes. So that's going to start up and start streaming the log files. Now we'll go back to GitHub. We'll go to our repository and we'll simply make a change. Let's change app.py. We'll edit that file by clicking the edit icon. We'll go down and let's just change the homepage HTML from continuous delivery to CD. And then we'll commit that change. Once we commit this change, what should happen is our build server should kick in. So if we go to GitHub Actions, we should see that yes, indeed, we have a new workflow that is running. And if we drill down into that workflow, we'll be able to watch the build steps as they happen. This will take a few minutes. And now we see the job is complete, the build is successful, and green check marks are good. Now if we pivot back to Azure DevOps and look at our pipeline, we should have some activity. And yes, indeed, the pipeline is running. If we drill down into that, we can see the individual job. The build stage is complete, and it's moved on to deploying the web app. This will take about 10 minutes. And there we see that our deployment is complete. Let's go back to Azure and we'll check our log files, and we see that the application is starting, it's listening, it's ready to get an event, and let's test it. First, we'll go back to our web app. Let's see if our changes are reflected by hitting the public URL. And there's the home page, and certainly it is. It went from continuous delivery to CD. That's a good thing. And now let's run a prediction and see if we can get a successful prediction to return. And there we go. Everything looks like it's working from end to end. Thanks for watching.